Evening, everybody. Hi, thank you. I know a few faces, many I don't know, and that's exciting because the ones that I do know might have heard some of this before, but that's all right. They need to be reminded. My name, Ben Reichel, pastor. Been only a pastor for 5 years now. Let's see if we can zoom in even more. No, maybe not. Went to Lutheran Prep in Watertown for high school, graduated 2006, graduated MLC 2010. Wasn't quite sure if I wanted to become a pastor, but then the dean of students at the time at Lutheran Prep came up to me before Christmas break and said I had the gifts and should try it out. I almost went into engineering, so those of you at MSOE, almost became a civil engineer. That's what my grandpa did, that's what my uncle does. My uncle runs his own company in Madison, doing soil testing and everything. So kind of in my blood, but so is being a pastor. So graduated from MLC, also played football there. That helps if you can play sports in college. Graduated from SEM in 2014. Been married to my wife for 5 years. Just celebrated 5th wedding anniversary this summer. Went up to Door County. First real vacation in probably 3 years. And it wasn't even a real vacation, it was Door County. But it counts. Been at Kettle for this is my 3rd year at Kettle, so I finished 2 years. Before that, I was a mission pastor down in Fulshire, Texas. Colleen was down there with us, one of our first mission teams down there. Came up here, and this class, I had to apologize at the end of the year because I was sleep deprived the entire time and had no idea what I was doing. So Xander, you're included in that too. And I'll apologize again. I don't know if you learned a thing.
I did second semester because I didn't have you.
Good answer. Yeah. So that first year was crazy because we moved up from Texas to West Bend, and we ended up moving from a rental house to a real house right in the middle of the school year with like a 6-month-old. So just life advice starting right now, don't do that ever. If you can, figure that out ahead of time. Don't move 1,500 miles and have a newborn and start a new job all in one summer. It's a little much. So my second year, I started going through my notes from first semester, and I was like, oh, this is awful. This is terrible. Did they learn anything? Like, I don't even know what this is. I pretty much changed everything. This year, I almost know what I'm doing, so Colin's in trouble. At least I'm working on it. So that's my background in a nutshell. Kind of leads you to where I am now. I was actually pretty honored and surprised that my name got brought up for these, because most of the time I don't think I have anything worthwhile to say. But the topics that I was given were very interesting, and I'm not an expert by any means, so I don't have all the answers, but this is definitely one of the topics that I'm really, really interested in. How long did we spend on Revelation? Does anybody remember?
All of second semester.
It's pretty much all of second semester. We had like 3 other books that we were supposed to cover and 3 other units. We didn't get to many of them. But because Revelation is such a big, difficult, tough book to understand, we spent a lot of time on it. And really, Revelation encompasses all of these other ones. So I was given end times, final judgment, heaven and hell, and Revelation, and everything in between. So as I was preparing for this, I wasn't quite sure how to do it because I didn't want to just stand up here and talk the whole time because that's super, super boring for everybody, including me. So I came up with this grade school style Prezi, which is super impressive, I know. And I was going to have it kind of formatted so you could choose what you wanted to talk about, and hopefully it works. And if we can't use the mouse, we'll just improvise. So I'm going to throw this out to you. I want this to be very you-driven, okay? And I even have bribes, just straight up bribery. I have candy. I know you just had cookies and pizza and stuff, but if you ask a question, if you answer a question, if you read a Bible passage, you get candy. And if you start falling asleep, I will throw candy at your head because I have a whole lot of candy that I need to get rid of. So we're going to start off with our first suggestion. What do you want to talk about first?
Revelation.
She gets candy.
Oh, no, I'm good, thanks.
Oh, you get candy. I'm just kidding. If you don't want candy, you don't need candy. There are 4 possible subtopics that we could talk about, or more. How many of you have read Revelation? Okay, good. How many of you have studied Revelation like a Bible study, had somebody explain it to you? Okay, good.
Yes,
Good. Yes, but I can't remember. That's fine. We'll start there too. Now which one do you want to talk about?
Common misunderstanding.
Common misunderstandings. Excellent. So there's 3 that I chose. This is the best Prezi ever. I'm like super impressed with myself right now. Probably the biggest one is millennialism. Millennialism is the false interpretation of Revelation chapter 20, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Is any? Yeah, that's as far as it goes. Don't embarrass me that much. This is grade school, okay? So, kind of backing it up too. I didn't come up with like a script or a theme or a talk or anything, because one of the things I've learned to do, especially in the high school classroom, is let the kids ask questions, because I figure that's going to be most beneficial. If I can answer their questions rather than me just force feeding them, it means a whole lot more. So that's what this is all about. Okay, I want you to ask questions. I want you to pick what we talk about, and you're going to drive the discussion. I'll try and answer them the best as I can as we go forward. But this is your show right now. So is everybody familiar with millennialism, the 1,000-year reign? At least kind of. Okay, see a lot of no's. Okay, I'm going to try and summarize it. There are 3 main views of this 1,000-year reign of Christ. And if you want to open up Revelation 20, just for context, you certainly can. There are other parts of Scripture that talk about Christ's kingdom and obviously the kingdom of God and all of those things. But people who believe in and teach the millennium or millennialism really go straight to Revelation 20 as their proof passage or their proof chapter of the Bible that, this says 1,000 years. And there are really 2 schools of thought. One says that Christ is going to come back at the end of the world and set up an earthly kingdom that's going to reign for 1,000 years, and then Judgment Day is going to happen. Then the opposite is that there's going to be 1,000 years of really prosperity for the gospel, and then Jesus is going to come. So there's premillennialism, which means Jesus is going to come back before the 1,000 years, and then Judgment Day. Then there's postmillennialism that says Jesus is going to come back after that 1,000 years. So they can't even agree when he comes back. So that's your first clue. The Bible actually teaches amillennialism. This just means no millennium, no 1,000 years. Okay, and this goes to will connect to the proper interpretation as well, because we can't take anything in Revelation literally. It's all figurative language. It's all picturesque. It's all visions that John saw. And so what he's trying to do is portray truths of Scripture through these visions and in picturesque ways to get a point across. So you can't just pick out one chapter, Revelation 20, and say, this is a literal 1,000 years. Everything else is figurative, but this is literal. Okay? That's misreading, misinterpreting the Bible on all accounts. That's probably the most common one. Then there's also dispensationalism, which divides that up into periods of grace for each group of people. And that one's actually becoming more and more popular today for some reason, I've noticed. Dispensationalism actually is tied in with the idea that the nation of Israel will actually have a country and be basically brought back to the glory days of the Old Testament before Jesus comes back. And then there's a whole lot of other weird layers that go in there, raptures and different things like that.
And
yes, ma'am.
That is simply because of what Revelation says? Like they think that's what's going to happen?
Yeah. Yep. They always go back to Revelation 20 because I think deep down they realize that no other portion of Scripture talks about any of this ever. So they have to focus on 20.
So this 1,000 years, could that be taken as like just instead of like a little 1,000 years, it could be just like a long period of time after Jesus ascends to heaven?
Indeed.
Okay.
You know what else we call that?
What?
The New Testament era.
Whoa.
I know. When we talk about God's kingdom and Christ's rule in our hearts, that's the 1,000 years that we're talking about. Numbers in Revelation is a fun topic too. Brandon.
Yeah.
Okay, so and I'm just looking at Revelation 20, verse 7 is like when the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison. Like, what does that exactly mean? Is that just that judgment day happens and that, everyone who's supposed to be in hell will be in hell, everyone's supposed to be in heaven will be in heaven?
You're right, but that has nothing to do with Satan being released. Yeah. There's an interesting couple of verses, and that's one of them in Revelation, that talk about right before Judgment Day happens, there's going to be some sort of terrible, short period of time for believers when it appears that Satan has a lot more power and control than he has before. The main reference in Revelation is to the tribulation, and that's not going to last for a specific amount of time, but it's going to last for a very short time right before Judgment Day happens. And so that's one of the clues that tells us right before Judgment Day happens, it's going to look like Satan is winning and evil is winning and sin is winning and everything's going wrong, and then all of a sudden Jesus is going to come back. So that's what that has to deal with. Yeah.
So everything we think that is bad right now is going to get way worse.
500 years ago, you know who thought the same thing? Luther. He thought the world is never going to get any worse than it is right now. He was convinced that Jesus was coming back in his lifetime because of what he saw and the evil that he saw in the world. And now I'm laughing at him. You think that was bad? You should see 21st century America. Yeah, and it's funny to see how theologians throughout history have always thought the same thing. And I think part of that is because of their understanding of the New Testament era and how Judgment Day is so close. The kingdom of God is near, those types of sayings. We know it's going to happen at any time. We don't know when, and we see all these signs happening, and so we just immediately think that it's going to be here, which isn't a bad thing to do either. Yeah.
So a verse that kind of caught my eye was, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony, ... They had not worshipped the beast or its image and not received its mark.
Yeah.
So, there are Christians being beheaded, there's Boko Haram, and there's all of these groups.
Yep.
But is there anything that we really consider the beast or the mark of the beast right now?
Yes. That goes back. So that's in Revelation 20. So we have to go back a few chapters to when John describes the dragon and the two beasts. The beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. The beast of the sea actually represents all evil governments throughout history and how governments have abused the power and authority that God has given them to persecute the church. So obviously you can think of plenty of examples of that, right? And then the other beast, the beast of the earth, couple different ways we can understand that. We can either think of it as just heresies in general, attacks from within the church, or more specifically, the Antichrist. And they both work for the dragon. Okay, so all three of them are working together to try and destroy God's church. And so the mark of the beast is really that mark that says the beast, the dragon, Satan has won that person. It's basically unbelief is what that is. But that's another one of those things where people try to take it literally and think, oh, it's going to be a tattoo. It's going to be a mark. I've even heard, and this is probably one of the most far-fetched ones, but ones that I was like, well, maybe. Like microchips implanted into people was going to be the mark of the beast. There's plenty of theories out there. But it's not actually going to be a physical, recognizable mark, which on one hand makes it a little more difficult because that would, that'd be nice, right? Be really easy to spot. But that just means that we can't focus on that. We have other things that we need to focus on before all of that stuff happens.
But does that also mean that it's not permanent? Like people who are stuck in that unbelief, they still can come to knowledge?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And so that's the general theme that we have to keep in mind as we look at all these visions and see in great detail the disaster and the destruction that John describes. It's easy to get carried away with that and think everything's hopeless. But what we see is that there's always a chance to repent. There's always a chance to come to faith. And that's where we actually find a lot of the comfort in Revelation is seeing that while all these terrible things are happening, there's still hope. There is still comfort. Yeah.
So as for Revelations 28 and 9, a common theory that you hear cited a bit more in the Southern evangelical type churches is the one about kind of like the current modern geopolitical situation as it would relate to Revelation. So for instance, I don't know if you heard of this one, but like the idea that once the nation of Israel has control over the entire Old Kingdom, then all the nations of the earth will march against them. God will destroy them, and it will start Judgment Day. The whole sequence of events. How do you think, or I should say, what other kind of misinterpretations could lead into something like that?
Well, part of that plays into the 1,000-year thing, because there are references in Revelation and other portions of Scripture that talk about Israel. Okay, but we have to remember that in the New Testament, Israel always refers to the church. It's no longer just the nation anymore. It's the church in general, all believers.
It's not just by blood that you're part of Israel.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the big revelation that Peter had in Acts chapter 10 with the vision of the sheep coming down and going to Cornelius' house. Now the message of the gospel is for the Gentiles, and obviously Paul's ministry was geared towards the Gentiles. And a lot of his letters said, you don't have to be, by blood to be part of Israel anymore. You've been grafted in by faith, right? So now this spiritual Israel, this spiritual house, is what's being referred to as being renewed and restored and all of those kind of picturesque languages there. So the 1,000 years plays into it, the references to Israel, and there's also another fun one, the Battle of Gog and Magog and Armageddon. Throw that one in there too, kind of same thing. But that's where people get this idea that it's going to be a war and an actual event that happens, after Israel regains control, and then everybody's going to march on them. There's a book, The Late Great, what is it called? The Late Great Country, or I don't know, something like that, written back in the 80s, and this philosopher, theologian, historian actually came up with battle plans for World War III based on Armageddon and how those troop movements were actually going to happen. Interesting. But people, and that goes back to the misinterpretation of taking portions of Revelation and taking them literally when we have to take everything figuratively and see it as a whole rather than pinpointing different details. Yeah, exactly. So that took care of literal, pretty sure. The bottom one, predicting the future. That's what a lot of people think Revelation does, is actually predicts the future, but only to a certain extent. It does not give specific details about countries or nations or political figures or even personal lives. It's laying out events that will happen before Judgment Day, on Judgment Day, and after Judgment Day. So keeping the correct perspective in all of those things is really, really important, because people want to take them literally and then apply them to their own lives or situations in the world. People during World War I thought that was that was Armageddon. Like, this is the end. And then World War II came, and they're like, nope, this is the end. This is really the end. And then, nope, it didn't happen again. So that kind of plays into the predictions, too. So there's really no future being predicted there other than the end times in general, Judgment Day, and then what happens after Judgment Day. So don't think Revelation has, this is like a magic 8 ball to answer all your questions about the future. Any others on that one? I knew I was going to have too much to talk about. Okay. Let's see if I didn't touch anything here. Yeah, symbols and visions. Does anybody remember this picture?
It's like a... Is that a...
Do you remember what it's called?
No, I don't.
That's
Can anybody guess the artist? When you use this as... Yeah, what? I heard it.
Salvador Dali.
Yep.
Dali, yeah,
Yep.
it is.
Dali.
I think Dali is in India.
Yeah, he's the melting clock and all those other ones. Yep. So I use this as the illustration to start the book of Revelation. What do you see in this painting?
Water dripping. Wait. An umbrella.
Yep, umbrella, phone.
That is Hitler, right?
That is Hitler. Yes, very good, very good. A little picture of Hitler.
Beans, magic beans.
It might be. I don't have a meaning for the beans, so I'm just assuming that's like leftovers on the plate. That is a bat. Yeah, a couple bats.
That's a woman in black.
Yeah, it's a creepy woman in black over there. This is a lobster claw. Supposed to be. Now, what does the painting mean?
Hitler's going to drown in lobster oil.
That's the secret. Lobster oil. So this, Dali painted this when Hitler started to gain power, gain control, and started invading countries. And so there was this overwhelming sense of fear in Western countries about Hitler. And so Dali tried to encapsulate that by using pictures and paintings. And so the lobster claw, the bats, the creepy lady in the background, obviously the little picture of Hitler on the plate, but all these things were how he envisioned this fear just gripping Europe because of what Hitler was doing. Now, if you don't have someone to explain that to you, if you don't know the meaning behind the painting doesn't mean much. We have to do the same thing with Revelation. Because Revelation is a series of visions and really instant replays of the same events. John sees 7 different visions, but there are common themes throughout and common interpretations of all 7. Just they're instant replays of the same events, just from different angles. Kind of like how the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, for the most part, they tell the same story, right? It's Jesus' ministry, his life, but they have different perspectives. They have different styles of writing, so they touch on different things. They explain things in different ways, but the story is still the same. It's the same with the book of Revelation. There are 7 different visions, but they all have the same meaning. They're all instant replays of the same events, end times, judgment day, and heaven, just from different angles, different perspectives. So that's what the symbols in the visions are. The beasts and the dragon. The dragon comes back a couple times throughout. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. 7 comes up a lot. All of those things.
Can you talk about numbers? And like
Numbers.
meanings?
Yes. Numbers and meanings. All of the numbers in Revelation stand for something. The most common ones are 3. What do you think 3 represents? Trinity. God. 4? Why?
4 directions.
Yeah. 4 directions. Northeast, southwest. And then we put those 2 things together. We have 3 plus 4 gives you 7. What does 7 represent? Why?
Oh, God and the earth. So, mesh them together. The church.
Close. This is Revelation math. 3 times 4 gives you 12, and how many Old Testament tribes were there? How many apostles were there? So that's the number of the church there is 12. So 3 plus 4, 7, that's God interacting with the world in general. Okay, so anytime that God interacts with the world is usually a reference to 7. So when you think of the 7 visions, the 7 seals, 7 bowls, 7 trumpets, everything that has to do with 7, that's God interacting with the world at some point during the end times, on Judgment Day, etc., etc. Okay, the world in general, not just his believers. But when there's a specific reference to God's church and his believers, that will be a multiple of 12. One of the most famous multiples of 12? Make sure you get the 1,000 in there. 144,000. That's another one that people like to take literally, specifically Jehovah's Witnesses. They think that 144,000 people are going to get to heaven. But there are like 2.6 million Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm not a math major. I'm pretty sure that's not even close. And so we have to do the Revelation math again. So if you got 12 times 1,000, what does the number 10 in Revelation represent? Completeness. Okay, so 10, the number of completeness, to the power of the Trinity, 3. Ultimate complete. Okay, ultimate complete number of all believers, Old Testament, New Testament, 12 times 12. That's the full number of people that are going to be in heaven. Okay, Old Testament, New Testament, the full complete number. That's 144,000. 3.5 is another good number. And don't say it's half of 7. Incomplete. Good. Well, I suppose you could say, well, all right, I'll let you say half of 7. What did we say 7 was?
God's never to interact with us.
Yeah, God's interaction with the world in general. So if you split that in half, what do you think we're talking about?
Half the world.
Not half the world. Half of God's interaction with the world. What? I think I heard.
Either the Old or the New Testament?
Yeah. So one of the testaments, which one is, Mike in trouble for saying this, which one is more important? New. Okay. Only because we're in it. And that's what Revelation talks about, right? It makes allusions to the Old Testament, makes connections to the Old Testament, but we're definitely talking about the New Testament era. So 3.5, and any multiple of that, it's like 1,260 days, 42 months. All of those come out to 3.5 years. And 3.5 is always used with a time element to it. So either months, days, years. So that's how we know it's a reference to the time period of the New Testament. So whenever you see any of those multiples, think New Testament era. The 1,000 years is the only one that's different in that it's not really a multiple of 3.5, but we understand it's the complete time that Christ rules. So I'm trying to think if there were any other ones. I think I got all the main ones.
Yeah. Square miles.
Only 666.
Well, 6 is different. The way I learned it is that 6 is the interpretation of how when Satan deals with the world, he falls short of God's glory.
Yeah, the fact that so 7 is the number of God's interaction with the world, 6 falls short. So Satan always tries, and that is in connection then with the number 666. 6 itself isn't used too much in Revelation, besides that number of the beast. And we can understand that it's always any description of either the beasts or the dragons, something doesn't quite match up. The numbers don't match. He falls short in one way or the other. He's got 7 heads but 10 horns, so it's like he's trying really, really hard to be God but can't. And then the number 666 kind of illustrates that as well, that evil trinity, if you want to call it that way. The devil, the world, our sinful flesh, something like that. Revelation doesn't go too much into 666, but that's a pretty good answer for that one. Any other ones that you can think of?
Is the number system the same in Revelations as it is in Daniel? Like prophecies in there?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Because Daniel and Ezekiel and Isaiah all have similar visions, just different perspectives and different ways of explaining it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the numbers are the same.
So it says in Revelation 21 about the angel measured the wall using human measurement is 144 cubits thick.
Yeah.
So like that's a multiple of 12. But like,
Yeah.
does it have anything like any other, like as far as being like the walls being thick or something?
I mean, it could be a veiled reference to them being thick. But what's the point? What's the point of the angel having him measure?
Yeah, it's just that it's 144.
It's 144. And the thing that we have to keep in mind there too is it's not a literal city.
Yeah.
21 and 22 of Revelation really paint you a good picture of what heaven is going to be like. It's described as a city, and it's got walls and gates and pearls and gemstones and all these things. But we have to keep in mind, too, that the most important thing is that heaven is where God's people are, and that's what the 144 is. All the measurements that come back are 144 cubits. So it's a perfect square, perfect cube. And so the numbers just illustrate that this is the way it's supposed to be. And so that's the big takeaway from that one. Any others? Does anybody want candy? Haven't handed out candy yet.
I was going to say.
All right. Let's see how it is. Who wants candy? I'm just going to start chucking stuff. Anybody? Somewhere over here. Over here? Yep. Take it. Oh, I almost got it in the cup too. That would have been awesome. Anybody? Whoa. Somebody else?
Okay, it was way up here.
Here, try another one. There. See? M&Ms? Anybody want M&Ms?
I'll take it.
We got, ooh, that one's like melted. Nope, nobody gets that one. All right, Skittles? We got Skittles. There we go. All right, we got more. Don't worry, we got plenty more. Go ahead.
So I don't remember exactly what chapter, what book of the Bible it's in, but they talk about like a reward system in heaven. I've never completely understood that. Can we kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. There are several sections in the Bible that talk about rewards of grace. I'm just going to switch gears here a little bit. And the thing to keep in mind there, another way you might hear it described is degrees of glory. Because Jesus himself says, we see it in the Old and the New Testament, that you will be rewarded for what you do here on earth. But keeping the proper perspective, obviously it's not our good works that earn us heaven. We're given heaven because of what Jesus did for us. But then while we're still here, we live our lives of sanctification. We live our lives out of thanks to God for what he's done. And he does promise us that those things will be rewarded in one way, shape, or form. Now, what that's going to look like, I don't know. Probably the illustration that I go to most is when Jesus says that he's going to heaven to prepare a place for us. What picture does he use? He's preparing what? Rooms or mansions. Okay? So, bear with me. We all get mansions in heaven, right? I'm going to have a pretty sweet mansion. But if I live next to Paul, he's probably going to have a really, really big mansion, right? Like probably 80,000 times bigger than mine or something. Infinite numbers. Am I going to be jealous, though? No, because I'm in heaven. It's awesome. Okay? So we're not sure what those rewards are going to look like, what those trophies are going to look like based on what we do in this life out of love for Christ and spreading the message. But there will be some sort of gifts, rewards of grace that God is going to give us in heaven to make heaven even better, if that's possible. But we can't really say much more than that. Yeah.
Why?
Well, what's our goal here on earth?
To get people to heaven?
Yeah. So in one sense, the end result for all believers is the same. We get to heaven, one way or the other. But while we're here, he wants us to work at this. We just covered a portion of Philippians where Paul says, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. That doesn't mean you're earning your salvation by what you do and by working it. But he does want us to bring people along. He wants us to share the message of the gospel so that the Holy Spirit does the work. Obviously, we don't get credit for it, but we do get to participate in the rewards. Why? I don't know. Because we already have heaven. What more could we want? What more could we need? But I think that just shows you the overabundance of God's grace for us. Like I said, Paul's going to have a huge mansion. Luther's going to have a huge mansion for the role that he played. I'm going to probably be in a shack down by the river, but it's still going to be a mansion, and I'm going to be in heaven, so it's awesome. So why? No, I don't know.
How does access to the gospel play a role into that? Because I just had a conversation last week that with an unbeliever friend. He laughed in my face once I basically told him he had a misconstrued idea of what Christianity actually was, but he was like, I don't want to. I would reject all this. He was totally down with Jesus being a real person. Jesus came, died for us, rose again, but was like, I don't believe in the fact that someone who has no access to the gospel could, they're just stranded type of thing. He didn't like the idea of you can't just believe it.
Yeah. And that's a huge stumbling block, I think, probably in today's society more so than any other time in history, because we try to contrive a sense of fairness. And so when we see something like that or come up with that question, well, why one person and they don't, they're in the jungle, they've never read the Bible, what does that mean for them? They go straight to hell. Well, that's not fair. No, it's not. But is the way that God deals with you any fairer? No. God doesn't deal with any of us in a fair manner. And that requires a really, really in-depth, personal discussion of what grace really is and what the gospel really is. And especially if he had a misconstrued view of Christianity to begin with, it's probably going to take even longer.
I came from the Mormon church, so.
Yeah, that's pretty misconstrued. And I think that still goes back to the idea of what's fair and what's not. The unfortunate part is, and this question gets asked a lot, especially by seniors in Word of God class, because they still have that sense of fairness. Well, it's not fair that I get to hear and I get to go to heaven and they don't. I agree. What does that mean you need to do?
Tell everyone you know.
Keep spreading the gospel. Yeah. And so I don't know if this might sound like a cliche or a cop-out, but we have to go back in time as well. That, once upon a time, someone did have contact and exposure to the gospel and chose to reject that message and then condemned generations worth after them. Okay? So we can go back to Deuteronomy when God says, I'm a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. That's specifically in reference to his laws, but we can expand that also to the gospel in general. Anybody who rejects the gospel isn't just saying, well, I don't believe that. They could be condemning generations and thousands of years of people after them. So no, it's not fair, but that should flip it around on us and be like, well, that should motivate us to go as far as we can and spread it as quickly as we can, especially with the technology and the transportation that we have today. Do you have a question first, and then we'll come back?
Just sort of mine was in general, where
okay.
I find a big problem with the whole heaven-hell dichotomy, punishment for sin, all that, because, in order to talk about the gospel, you need to establish some sense of moral absolutism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what I found, at least recently, in talking to different people and trying to, talk to them about this, is that the level of moral relativism in our society today is just insanely high.
Mm-hmm.
I went to prep, and then after that, I went through the public college system,
Okay.
at least tech school for a few years, and then here to interview. And it honestly just kind of, obviously they talk about like the bubble you get into when you're at a Christian high school, but just the sheer degree of just the complete lack of moral absolutism. The ability to justify basically anything based on context and how you feel about it. And it makes it extremely difficult to even convince people that something can be right or wrong. And so how do you even start to convince people that heaven and hell are real, that people have, it seems like the only absolutism is whether something is enjoyable or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you talk about a place where you can be peaceful and, there's nothing happening, and people are like, that sounds boring. I'd rather be drinking whiskey and doing shots or something like that. It's I don't know, it's very kind of befuddling to me where you're trying to interact with people who don't even speak the same language as you when it comes to morality, and so, where do you start then? I recently tried to talk to my roommate about it, and he got extremely upset at me because the example he gave was, Somali immigrants in Minneapolis, because that's where he was from, who steal from shops because they don't have food because of whatever reason, because they have difficulty integrating, right? I would, personally, I said that's wrong. They're stealing, right? Mm-hmm. They're committing a crime against both the Bible, which says do not steal, and against the local jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And his answer, I think many of us here would have the same experience talking to people who think this way, which is, given the situation, it was fine. They didn't do anything wrong. And, he's still upset at me for that. He doesn't even really talk to me anymore, so I guess, swinging a miss on that one.
Yeah.
But it kind of just highlights just how much of a split there is. So how do you approach people who have no sense of moral absolutism about this?
Well, I would in a kind and gentle way turn it back on them, and get their perspective on, okay, what do you think is right and wrong? Like get them to explain where they draw the line between right and wrong. And there are ways that you can kind of push them to make a decision on whether something is right or wrong. That would be one way. Well, right. And so that takes a little bit of patience and perseverance and a thick skin too. But to bring it up, and you're right, it's their sense, the society's sense of right and wrong comes down to, does it feel good? Right? Do I enjoy it? Does it bring me peace? Does it feel good? Well, then I'm going to do it. Doesn't matter what anybody else says. So you really have to dig a little bit deeper to try and get the emotions out of it. I know. Because what you will find is they will eventually admit that something is wrong. Like, people should not do it. If you want to go so far as murder, okay, that's a little more dramatic than stealing. Okay, there will be people who will justify murder, taking someone's life, because they don't value life like Christians do. But there will be, every single person has that natural knowledge and that conscience. But more and more people have that conscience dulled very, very early on, and it's calloused, and it's really hard to break through that. But if you get them to articulate what they view as the difference between right and wrong, then you can start establishing connections, because obviously we understand what is right and wrong. We do have that universal objective moral code that God has laid out for us. And there are plenty of options there to make the connection say, well, I agree with that. I know that's wrong. So let's talk about that. Let's focus there. Because if you can go the philosophical route too, not necessarily that you're going to win the argument or convert them or convince them that your way is right. But if you take that idea to its logical conclusion that everything is relative, it's actually a logical impossibility.
Of course, there's tons of this.
Yeah. again, it depends on what your relationship with is with them, how comfortable you are. But I mean, you can really break down all of their arguments against all these things. But it does take time, does take perseverance, patience, and certainly a whole lot of love to get through. It's about as good as I can do.
Like people who maybe don't agree that like actions or choices are right or wrong, so we say that they have more relativism or they're thinking this way, they still can agree that situations are wrong. So if we asked his roommate like, well, what's wrong about the situation, he would probably say like the fact that they're in this position where they feel like they have to steal, like that's wrong. So that's like common ground.
Yeah.
And so like I think most people who we think that they don't have a sense of right or wrong, they do. They just, it's with actions and choices that we don't agree. But everybody can understand like there's something that is not the way it should be.
Yeah.
And so that's like, you have that in common with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Because then what that does is that actually removes a lot of the emotion, because then you're not getting angry at maybe, your roommate's not getting angry at you, now he's getting angry at the situation, but that also provides an opportunity to say, yeah, something's messed up, right? And this world is broken, you're broken, I'm broken, law gospel type thing.
That's where we started. Like that's where I started with it.
Was that the world is broken, or something's messed up?
Yeah, there's things that are wrong.
Yeah.
I couldn't even agree with on that, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
It's kind of like the digression of contextualization.
Yeah.
Where you say, you just like, you try to dig into an issue, and then eventually it just gets spread out by saying, well, it depends on the context, and this, and, it's...
Yeah.
It's like trying to build a sandcastle and someone spreads it across the entire beach, What do you gotta work with?
Yep. Yeah.
You guys have got great points on the relativism, but I kind of want to go back to Alicia's question for a second.
Okay.
So even if you're not talking about like, what's fair and what's unfair, isn't there that one part in the Bible where Jesus is talking about the Pharisees, and he says, like, woe to you who have been given much more will be expected. Mm-hmm. But if like generations have been given nothing of like the words for God's love and who he is, like nothing other than a natural knowledge, then how much is expected of them that could lead to condemnation?
That's a really good question. What Jesus is doing in that section. So this kind of this flips the coin with the degrees of glory and the rewards of grace in heaven. There's always the other side of it. There are levels of torment in hell. Hell is hell, no matter what, just like heaven is heaven. But the way Jesus himself uses that section and in other descriptions of hell in the Bible, we get this sense that, not quite like Dante's Inferno style, seven layers of hell. Oh boy. Sorry, we don't need that anymore. There are degrees of torment in hell, and what he's trying to say there is that the Pharisees and Sadducees should have known better, because they had God's word. They had the law. They even had the gospel promises, and yet they threw it all away. They built their salvation on their own righteousness, their own works, and added more and more burdens to the people at the same time. And so that's why Jesus always has to call them out throughout his ministry. He's like, you guys should know better, because you've had Moses and the prophets for generations, and yet you still don't get it. And that's why he says Sodom and Gomorrah will basically stand in judgment over the Pharisees and Sadducees, because they didn't have it. They didn't know better. Not much was expected of them. But the result is still the same. Both are going to end up in hell because of their rejection of Christ and their lack of faith. So it's this interesting concept to try and understand, because hell is complete separation from God's grace. It's like when people say, oh, I'm going through hell right now, it's you're not. Might feel like a terrible day. But every single day, every single person over the face of the earth experiences God's love and his providence and his protection, obviously in varying degrees. But the fact that we're able to wake up and breathe and walk and do the things that we can do on a daily basis are all evidence of God's love and grace. Whether people realize it or not, that's their fault, right, if they don't. But when you think of hell, it's complete removal of all God's goodness and his grace. And all you're left with is that vengeance and that punishment and that wrath that we see only glimpses of in the Bible, but it's for all eternity, and it's mental, it's physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. His presence is still there, but it's only his wrath. And how that can be in varying degrees, I don't know. But the way Jesus describes it is those people who had the opportunity or should have known better will end up some way, somehow, worse in hell than people who never got the chance.
Well, if there's varying degrees then on either end, heaven or hell, is there room in Christian belief for a purgatory type setting? Okay.
Nope. Because there are very clear passages in the Bible that say as soon as a person dies, they are judged. Okay? So as soon as we all die, we will go to one of two places, and those are the only two places the Bible mentions, heaven or hell. And it's instantaneous. Our bodies will go in the ground, our bodies will decay, they won't disappear, but they will decay, they will rot, and our souls will go heaven or hell. Then Judgment Day comes, whenever that happens, and our souls and bodies are reunited, and then we go back. So if we die before Judgment Day, our souls will go to heaven. We'll be in heaven. There's no time, so all of a sudden we come back, and then our bodies and souls are reunited on Judgment Day, and then both body and soul go back up into heaven. Okay? So someone who dies before Judgment Day enjoys the bliss and glory of heaven to its fullest degree, but only spiritually. And then after Judgment Day, when the new heavens and new earth are there, you get to experience it in full force, spiritually and physically. So I don't know how that's going to work. But it's the same thing with hell, too. So right now, souls are in torment in hell. And then when Judgment Day happens, not only will it be spiritual pain and agony and wrath, it will be physical as well.
So does that mean that's what it's like for people who are in heaven right now because they have no concept of time, so they don't know? So right now they're technically reunited with their bodies?
Not yet.
So how does that work?
I don't know how the lack of time works, but it sounds fascinating.
I guess just the fact that it's never ending and always is there just makes sense.
Yeah, they have a, at least as far as I can understand it, they have a limited understanding of time only in the sense that they understand that they're in heaven and it's eternal, but it's not like they're waiting. So, like if you had grandparents that died, they're not like just twiddling their thumbs up there waiting for Brandon to come. This is real fun and all, but it's kind of been a while. It's not that that's not that sense of time, right? I think they do have a weird sense of they're in heaven, but it's not quite Judgment Day, because the descriptions of the saints in heaven that we see in Revelation, they're asking questions. How long, Lord? Right? How long is it going to be before you take vengeance on, our blood, martyrs? So it gives us this sense that, yes, souls that have died have maybe a longer sense of time, only in the sense that it's not quite eternal like God is eternal and in an eternal present. But they still understand the fact that Judgment Day hasn't happened because obviously they're still spirits and they're waiting for their bodies. Like I said, I don't know how that works, and that's as good as I can explain it, but it sounds fascinating.
So is that, from what I'm understanding, is there like a pre-judgment heaven and a post-judgment heaven?
Yes. Pre-judgment heaven, post-judgment heaven. Pre-judgment day heaven is that spiritual state of existence in the presence of God. and that weird time element is kind of involved there. But then when Judgment Day happens, the current state of both earth and heaven's going to be destroyed because they're going to become one, right? Because right now, we know this isn't where we were meant to be. We know we're not supposed to stay here. This is just temporary. These are tents. Those are all descriptions, obviously, that the Bible uses for this time here on earth. We're travelers, we're strangers. Because we know heaven is our home, but we aren't going to be able to fully experience that until our bodies and souls are reunited and we live in God's presence for all of eternity in that new heavens and new earth. And the way the Bible describes that transition from this current state to the new heavens and the new earth, it's called an unraveling. It's called a renovation, a renewal, a cleansing. There's a whole lot of different words that describe it. We don't really know what it's going to look like. Is he going to completely destroy this earth and everything in it and then start brand new? Maybe. Is he going to transform this earth, cleanse it from all of the sin and the pain and the suffering that was brought in the Garden of Eden and recreate what the Garden of Eden was like? And then that's where we live? Maybe. But yeah, there is a difference between heaven now and heaven after Judgment Day. And it's the heaven after Judgment Day that we see in Revelation 21 and 22. It's a returning back to that garden of life. And if you look at the description of the river, it obviously defies all physics. It's more, like it's deeper, it's wider, it's longer at its end than it is at the beginning. And everything just seems to be backwards because you know that it's not a real river. It's all of God's grace that is just overflowing because there is no more sin anymore. There's nothing holding it back. There's nothing holding us back anymore. So the descriptions of heaven that we see in Revelation, and that's usually how the visions will go. They will describe the end times, the New Testament era, what we're in right now. They'll describe the events of Judgment Day, and then there'll be a short little glimpse of what heaven looks like after, before he starts the next vision and does the whole thing over again. And that's why it ends with 21 and 22 with that picture of the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and the new earth. So, yeah, I'm going to end there.
Do you have a good definition for a soul?
Good definition for a soul. I don't, but I know people who do. I would say that the soul is the eternal, immaterial possession of God given to each individual person. You can expand on that a little bit, but we can't go too far. We do know that the Bible refers to the soul in different ways. When Adam was created, God breathed into him the breath of life. So that's what we understand as the soul, is the breath of life that God breathed into Adam to not only cause him to be alive, but to make him that special crown of God's creation. And that's the distinguishing feature between us, obviously, and the rest of creation. We have that soul, we have that personal connection that belongs to God. And so, obviously, whatever happens in this life, gospel or not, faith, unbelief, that soul still belongs to God. And because it belongs to God, it's either going to heaven or it's going to hell. But God is the one who makes that decision because our soul belongs to him. There's been a lot of thought and philosophy on what really comprises the soul. Is it actually tangible? I don't know why you would do this, but people, scientists, philosophers, theologians, weighed bodies before and after death and supposedly had micrograms worth of matter that, I don't know how that all works. But I was like, I don't think it's quite that measurable. So there's a lot that's tied in with the soul: personality, will, consciousness, if you want to go that far, reason. All of those things I think are definitely parts of and instruments of the soul. But I would go with that immaterial, eternal part of us that still belongs to God. There's probably a better definition out there somewhere. Yes?
Wondering where purgatory as a concept originated.
Catholic Church.
Yeah, that's the easy answer. It was a theory and a philosophy born in the Catholic Church as a way to make sense of their core belief, really. Because the Catholic Church is built on works righteousness, obviously. And they came up with this system that said, if you don't do enough good works in this life, but you're still a pretty good person, like you should still get to heaven somehow. So let's try this. And they came up with purgatory, and it took a while, but then it was passed or approved by one of the popes and a few of the councils, and then it just officially became Catholic doctrine. It wasn't very early on in the Catholic Church either. It was actually a pretty later development, but it stemmed from this idea that there's no way that we can do enough good works. Well, normal people, saints can do even more. We can't do enough in this life, so there's got to be an in-between that gives us another opportunity to get to heaven, because that's human logic, human reasoning. We have to come up with a system that will work, and that's where purgatory really came from, and then kind of took off from there.
I was wondering when approximately.
1500s.
It was even before then. I want to say 13th or 14th century. I can't remember if it was one of the councils or if it was actually a papal declaration. I knew I should have studied more history before I came. Yeah, I think it was 12 or 1300s. Yeah. So then, obviously, by the 1500s and Luther and the indulgences, it was pretty full-blown by that point. 1247. We don't have my, super fancy Prezi anymore.
What are the brief? So you said that Revelations kind of goes in cycles. What are the brief explanation? You have the cycle of the trumpets, the cycle of the scrolls.
Okay.
The bowls.
Let's go through them real quick. Got to make sure I get them in order. So, the first 3 chapters of Revelation really set the stage. And then in chapter 4, we're given a picture of the throne room in heaven. And this is probably one of my favorite portions of Revelation. Quiz time. In Revelation 4, and we see the throne room, and there's the Lamb taking the scroll. What event in Jesus' earthly life does that correspond to? Nope. So there's a description of the throne room, obviously, all the picturesque language. And then, so you got the 4 living creatures, the description of them, what they're singing, 24 elders around them. And then, in chapter 5, then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides, sealed with 7 seals. So that's the introduction to the first vision, 7 seals. Saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. John wept and wept. Nobody was there. Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. The Lamb had 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. When he had taken it, the 4 living creatures, 24 elders, fell down before the Lamb. And then they sing, everybody's singing, worthy is the Lamb. Really good songs. What?
Jesus coming back.
Yeah, and what event in his life is that? When does Jesus come back to heaven? Nope. His ascension. So Revelation chapter 5 is the heavenly perspective of Jesus' ascension. Okay, he's the Lamb that had been slain, so he had already died, he had already risen from dead, and now he comes up to finally take the scroll and reveal what's about to happen. That is like the coolest picture in all of Revelation, in my opinion. Because you make a connection between the ministry and the life of Jesus to now heaven in Revelation chapter 5, and the Lamb is there. He takes the scroll from God the Father on the throne saying, I'm worthy, I did it, I completed the plan of salvation, and he's the only one who can open these scrolls. Then you go to the 7 seals, and each seal, when it is opened, reveals an event, or describes an event, I should say, taking place during end times. So really the main passages that we look for end times, Matthew chapter 24, signs of the end, earthquakes, famines, rumors of wars, all those things. And so what Revelation does is in all 7 of those visions is really expand on that and describe them in full detail. So the first seal, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, they describe events that are happening. Every successive seal leads closer and closer and closer to Judgment Day and gets more and more intense. And by the time you get to the 6th, either the 6th seal, the 6th bowl, 6th trumpet, there's a pause. Because the 7th always announces Judgment Day. So as things get more and more intense and appears to be worse and worse and worse, there's a break. There's a pause to let everything sink in and for you to remember who wins. Jesus wins. That's the theme of Revelation. If you don't remember anything I talked about tonight, Revelation, Jesus wins. So then when Judgment Day comes and the 7th seal is open, the 7th trumpet is sounded, all of those things, Judgment Day, Jesus wins. The church wins on Judgment Day. And that kind of goes back to the whole loosing of Satan thing right beforehand. Things get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until Judgment Day. And so each one of those visions follows that same pattern, just describes it in different ways and uses different ways of expressing signs of the end time and then finally Judgment Day. Getting the killer signal. All right. Any final questions on anything? Either heaven, hell, judgment, death, life, revelation, anything that jumps out? All right. I don't know if any of my contact information is on there. Otherwise, we can certainly get that to you. If you do have any other questions, by all means, reach out. I'm more than happy to help out, answer any questions that you might have. So I'm going to say thank you. This is actually really, really fun. Kind of intimidated at first. Like I said, I don't know why people want to hear me talk, but yeah, this is a great time. Glad you all were involved and excited. So thank you. Appreciate it.